serious player at Westminster after the general election in May, and Nigel Farage joins me now. Welcome to you.
Good morning.
We're in the aftermath, of course, of the budget, and you criticised the budget. You said George Osborne had kicked everything into the long grass. So it's an opportunity to ask you about UKIP's budget thinking, or long-term thinking, for the economy, because you want to save lots of money from our EU expenditure, of course, and all of that. But you have made many commitments to big tax rises, big tax cuts, I beg your pardon, and you want the deficit dealt with quicker. So how does it all add up?
Well, big tax cuts at the bottom, meaning no tax on minimum wage to give people real incentives to get off benefit and get back to work.
You also want to cut the top rate as well, don't you?
No, that would not be a first-stage priority. Ultimately, yes, but right now, the people that have suffered in the last 5 or 10 years are those at the lower end of the income scale, and they're the people that actually need real help.
So you raise thresholds dramatically?
Yes, dramatically, yes.
So how
absolutely.
do the numbers add up? You want to get rid of the deficit faster than the Tories, and you want to give tax cuts.
Well, the point is that this coalition government was formed to eradicate the deficit. And it's still running at 90 billion a year. And yet the Chancellor stood up there and said, what a marvellous success this government's been. Yes, we have growth in the economy, but given the scale of a deficit we're running, that's hardly surprising. So what we will talk about tomorrow, well, Patrick O'Flynn, our economic spokesman, will talk about tomorrow, will be, yes, the net 10 billion we will save by not being members of the European Union. The 10 billion a year we want to cut off the foreign aid budget. A small amount of money for genuine humanitarian missions, but not the rest of it, which the British public certainly supports us very strongly on. Stopping some of the big white elephant projects,
well, I was going to say
like HS2.
You have to go further than simply the EU money and the foreign aid money you've talked about, if you're going to deliver substantial tax cuts for working class voters.
I mean, interestingly, just with the EU and the foreign aid budget, we would already be making a bigger real-term reductions in spending than this government's proposing, because I've seen nothing from George Osborne that says to me they're serious about deficit reduction in the next 5 years.
Can I just be clear, is it still the case that you want to get rid of the 45p rate and cut it to 35p and get rid of inheritance tax for most people?
Inheritance tax we want to get rid of, absolutely. That is dragging in far too many people for whom this tax was never ever designed. Taking down top rate tax is not our priority and will not be on our manifesto in this election campaign. Ultimately, it's a longer term goal, but it's the struggling Britons that we really think need help.
What about welfare cuts? The Conservatives are committed to, I think, £12 billion of welfare cuts, but haven't laid out exactly what that means.
No.
Would you support that, and how would you do that?
Well, if we think that plan's responsible, then Patrick O'Flynn has said we will support sensible, costed reductions of spending, but we need to see a serious plan to get the deficit down.
Does it go far enough?
Well, if you look at the last 5 years, virtually nothing's been achieved because we're still running a £90 billion a year deficit. So, I mean, I think there is we will show tomorrow that we can make some genuine savings by cutting back on bureaucracy, by cutting back on quangos, by not spending up to £70 billion on HS2. We'll put some very practical plans on the table.
The Taxpayers Alliance, for instance, has suggested getting rid of 3 government departments and taking the savings from that. Is that the kind of thing that attracts you?
Well, certainly, streamlining everything through our civil service and indeed in elements of our public services is very attractive indeed.
Now, you know that politicians of all parties for many, many years have promised to get great big cuts out of savings in the civil service, savings in bureaucracy. So I must press you. How much money do you think you could actually save, and how would you do it?
Oh, no. Listen, let Patrick O'Flynn tomorrow give you some numbers on this and then more in our manifesto launch. We're not yet fully in the general election campaign, but we will be proposing some pretty radical cuts to middle management bureaucracy right through the state sector.
Now, what about Janice Atkinson, your MEP, whose agent, not her herself, but her agent was recorded doing what appears to be straightforward fraud on the taxpayer?
I was truly shocked. It's one of the most awful things I've ever seen on film.
Her chief of staff, I should have said, not her agent.
Yeah. We will have tomorrow a disciplinary hearing to establish what the link was between that member of staff and Janice Atkinson.
If she knew about it, should she stand down as a UKIP candidate?
Without any shadow of a doubt. I mean, the one thing you can say to me, you can say, well, look, you've had to lose this person and that person. I have been utterly ruthless as UKIP leader with people who've stepped over the line, whether it's with financial mismanagement or whether it's saying things that, frankly, have erred towards racism. I've been ruthless at getting rid of people. At least I'm consistency that are taking elections seriously. And to do that, you need some discipline. Now, that doesn't mean we won't push the boundaries of argument. I want all UKIP people to think freely and do that. But it does mean that we don't need people causing massive distraction.
You don't, but they're still there.
Well, yes,
week after week after
I
week.
mean, look.
So what's going on?
Now, look, there are one or two other political parties who've been around for a couple of centuries, and they appear to have some difficult headlines this morning. Controlling human nature is not the easiest thing to do. I accept that sometimes things go wrong, but when they do go wrong, I deal with them. And what is really interesting...
But you promised to professionalise the party and deal with all of this, and we still have story after story after story.
Well, I tell you what you haven't written about, and no one's talked about, and that is the hundreds of UKIP candidates that are standing in this general election who've got more breadth of life experience and represent a greater cross-section of what frankly has become a class-divided politics in this country. We have got a fantastic range of candidates fighting this.
But your internal sieve isn't working well enough, is it?
I think it is, yes. I think it is. I think we're very, very good at weeding people out. Honestly, I do. And as I say...
So we're not going to see more of this kind of stuff?
Well, there are 640 people standing for UKIP. Maybe one or two of them will prove to say silly things. But we have made sure we've checked our people, we've checked their credit histories, we've done everything we can to give the electorate fair and decent people.
Yes. Your own agent, I think, was once a National Front supporter, was he not? Which is...
Well, over 40 years ago, yes. But his biggest crime was that he was chairman of the Ramsgate Conservatives for many years. Obviously a very serious situation, but we decided to let him off that.
All right, let's move on to your election thinking, because it is perfectly possible, as you said in your new book, that you will have just enough MPs to have some effect on the balance of power. You've made your offer to the Conservatives and they've said no thanks. So where do things stand now?
Well, of course they've said no thanks. I mean, they're generally fairly beastly about UKIP. At the end of the day, this is all about numbers, isn't it? I mean, I still believe that the Conservatives will be the biggest party, not least of which is because Alex Salmond's party is doing so well in Scotland. And I think between UKIP and possibly the DUP in Northern Ireland as well, there will be a body of MPs there to have significant influence and to force a referendum on our EU membership.
The problem with your offer to the Conservatives, or your demands to the Conservatives, which is a referendum this calendar year, before this Christmas, is that it doesn't clearly give David Cameron any chance for his renegotiation. But therefore makes it much likelier that British people would vote no.
Yes, but Donald Tusk and Mr Juncker, the two bosses of the European Union, have made it perfectly clear there is no renegotiation. When it comes to the fundamental point of the free movement of people and immigration into the UK, which is the #1 issue in British politics, and I think between now and May the 7th will start to dominate this general election campaign, there is no renegotiation.
If one of your candidates was recorded doing a deal with the EDL, how would you react?
I'd be absolutely mortified, and their feet wouldn't touch the ground.
Right. Let's move on to the final thing I need to talk to you about, which is Thanet South, because in your book it's perfectly clear that you are at least a little uneasy about your chances of taking Thanet South. And one of the people you're up against is Al Murray, the pub landlord. Now, you say something interesting in the book about Al Murray. You say that he's broken the limits on election expenses and therefore he won't be allowed to stand. Is that really the case?
Well, that depends on the Electoral Commission, and given the number of times Elcom have let UKIP down, perhaps that won't prove to be the case. Look, what I've said about Thanet South is that as leader of the party, if I don't succeed, then clearly the party will seek somebody else. And this seems to have become a big news story. I thought all I was doing was stating the obvious.
But you are up against Al Murray as well as everybody else. It is possible that a comedian would stop you from taking Thanet South and therefore derail the entire Purple Revolution.
I think this very middle-class, Oxbridge-educated comedian who's got a very good comedy act, when he turns up in South Thanet, is seen to be very patronising to ordinary, decent working people. I don't think he'll get many votes. Thanet South will be a fiercely contested election. Labour are trying hard, the Conservatives are trying hard, we're trying hard. I believe that I will win.
And in your waters, you think you're going to do it?
Yes.
Nigel Farage, for now.